All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about how to set a breakpoint. But before we actually talk about how to set a breakpoint, let's talk about what is a breakpoint. And we kind of already made some reference to what a breakpoint is in a previous video, but let's kind of give a working definition for that. So here, a media query is composed of an optional media type and 0 more expressions. And we'll see what this means here. So the keywords here is media type, and then there's going to be expression. The expression can be a width of 768 pixels. You kind of think the expressions as the conditions. So what conditions will trigger our media query to fire off the new set of CSS style rules? So here's what a CSS style rule looks like. I'm sorry, what a media query looks like, and then here's a CSS style rule embedded or placed as a child of the media query. So we have to start off with using this keyword at media, and we give the media type. And so there's a number of different media types. And so in this case, we're going to be using screen. But look at the various media types that we do have exposure to. So we have TV, speech, print, handheld, and these all can be used within the media query. But in our case here for our class, for our projects, we'll be using screen. So we'll say at media screen, and then here's our expression, or some people like to call our condition. And this is essentially the breakpoint, right? You can say at a max width of 525 pixels, trigger these new style rules. And this is the cool thing, is that these new style rules, you can pretty much re-alt the site to your likening at this particular screen width. And so this is the basic syntax of a CSS style rule. I'm sorry, of a media query. Again, these are the various media types that we can use within the media for the media type. There's print, and so if you wanted somebody to print off your website, if they say Control P, we can actually change the layout to be a little more presentable for print. And the same thing with when we look at the projection. If we want to project our website through a projector, we can change our CSS to better project on using projectors. Again, we kind of just talked about the syntax. The breakdown here is that this kind of shows an example of two different expressions or conditions. And what this is saying that anywhere between a minimum width of 480 pixels and a maximum width of 768 trigger some CSS style rules. And on this previous slide, you'll see the syntax is that at a max width of 480 pixels, it's going to target the header element and change or override the width to be 90%. Right. And this is key here, is because when we talk about overriding, essentially that's what you're going to be doing, is that you're going to override the default CSS style rules that you have that are not part of a media query. And we'll take a look at the different ways that this is implemented. So there are several ways you can implement a media query. The first being you could essentially just link to it using a link tag, and you could place this link tag within the head of your website. But look at the structure of this link tag. You will say link, the REL, the relation stands for the REL stands for relationship. It's going to be style sheet. The type is going to be media and the screen, and then we give the expression, right? And then we give the relative file path by using the href attribute. We can also use the add import CSS rule, where this can go either in your internal or external CSS. You use the URL function, and the argument is going to be the relative file path. And then here you give the media type and you give the expression. My favorite is just putting using the at media query and putting it inside of your internal or external. The benefit of doing it either this way or using a link tag is that you can actually break up your style sheets and have separate style sheets for certain screen widths or particular devices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate this here. I'm going to copy these 3 style rules here, and I'm going to paste them into our class example. So here's our class example website. Let's go and render this in the browser. Open the default browser. This is what we have thus far. I did make a few adjustments to the height and the sizing of this text, but nonetheless, our site is coming along, and we're going to continue to flush this out throughout the semester here. So what I'm going to do is add some media queries to my my CSS, internal CSS code. Remember, I'm doing everything right now at the moment internally between the opening head and the closing head tag. Now, here's the key to this. How do you implement your media queries? Right, you can use the add import, right? So I can go here, I can use the add import, right? And begin to do the add import way. I can also use a link tag here, right? And implement a media query. But my preferred way is actually just using the syntax to add a media query to your existing CSS, whether it's internally or externally. Now notice that I placed this at the bottom, right? And this is key, is that we want to place these media queries at the end of our default CSS. Now when I say default CSS, I'm referring to the CSS that's not part of the CSS media query. And so here, all of this is my default CSS, right? This CSS, these CSS style rules go in between my opening style tag and my closing style tag. And then here at the bottom here, I have 3 different media queries, one for 1024, one for 768, and one for 480. Now, like I said, this is just one way of implementing. And what I'm going to do here is, the first thing I'm going to do is just to test to make sure that your media queries are working. How do I test to see if my media queries are working? I want to target the header of or the navigation of my site. Let's see here. So my navigation is profile nav. It's ID. And I'll just paste that for each one of these here. And the reason why I put, so you'll see that there's various background colors. So for this one here, I just put blue. So let's do this here. Change this from, and I'll put red here. All right. Like I said, this is just a test to make sure that the media queries are working. And what should happen is that when the screen width gets below 1024, my background of my navigation should change to red. When it gets below 768, it should change to blue, and the same for 480, it should change to red. So let's save this and test that the media queries are working. We bring up our web page again. We refresh. And let's go ahead and actually inspect our website. So right click and inspect. And now I want to guide your attention to 2 areas. One, I want you to look in the right hand corner so you can actually see the screen width as I scroll down. And then also pay attention to this area down here. Once a breakpoint is hit, you'll see that new CSS style rules will be triggered. So let me first grab an edge here and watch what happens here. I'm going to also highlight my navigation so we can actually see what happens to the profile nav. So again, watch this area here. Right now it's at 1826. My first breakpoint should trigger at 1024. I'm going to go a little faster. All right, so here comes 1024. So we had 1065, 1053. So 1024, boom. My breakpoint triggers to red. And again, at this point, I only have one CSS style rule written, which targets my profile nav. But I can have as many different style rules, new style rules within this media query. Like I said, if I wanted to, I can change the whole entire look and feel of my website just by overriding the default CSS. Again, let's continue to move on. So if we scroll down to 768, which we're going to come here pretty soon. So here's 768, right? You'll see that it transfers from red to blue. And our last one here is 480. And you'll see that that's going to transition to a red. Well, we can't see it now because my browser's only allowing me to go a certain width here. But if I were to change this here to be a little bit higher, you'll see it change to red. But none of doubt, it would change to red if I were to condense my browser to 480. So those are working, right? And that's one way of implementing the CSS media query. Again, just to recap on that, make sure that your media queries are placed at the end of your default CSS. And what is your default CSS? It's basically all your CSS that is not a part of a CSS media query. And then here I have 3 different media queries, right? I have one that's at a 1024 breakpoint, one is at a 768, one is at a 480. And here I'm overriding my profile nav, right? Here's my profile nav. It doesn't have a background color, so you can add new CSS properties, right? Or you can override the existing CSS property. Again, you can add new CSS declarations, or you can override the existing CSS declarations. All right. So just a quick video on how to get started with media queries. There's three different ways. Is essentially you can do the add import, which is this way here, right? And you have to use this syntax. You can use a link tag, which is very similar to the add import. It's just that this link tag will go on the head of your website. And then my preferred way is using just using the media query and placing it into your existing CSS style, whether that's going to be internally or externally. And then you can begin to add CSS style rules to those various media queries. Here's an activity I would like you to take a stab at. I'm going to make this 2 points of extra credit, and it's going to be due before class. Essentially, you're going to complete these 3 steps. You're going to right click, or you can click on this button here, and you're going to fulfill those 3 steps using this document here. I would say please do this activity. It's going to help you with understanding some of the concepts related to media queries. And like I said, post your code to the discussion board within Canvas, and there'll be a discussion that'll be posted for your respective course. In our next video, we're going to talk about images, how to make your images responsive. We're going to talk about something called the video tag, and how to work more effectively and making sure that your images are displayed and represented at the various screen widths.